Happy New Year, All Saints. It's good to be with you as we come into the new year. And if you've been with All Saints for any amount of time, you know at the beginning of the year, we start with a little chat about margin. And so thinking about it this year, it takes on a whole new understanding and a whole new practice. And so during this pandemic, and this won't be news to anybody, by the way, we've experienced new stresses, new anxieties, life alterations that really have radically changed the way we work, the way we do family, and the way we spend our time. Working from home, helping the kids do school online, being isolated, no recreational time, and a feeling of stagnation. We have to learn new rhythms and learn then what does margin look like all over again. And I was just thinking about those little moments of margin that you get when you're in the office, when you walk down the hall to the place where all you cool tech people have your amazing coffee stands and stuff. And you just have that time to hang out with friends. Or just being able to have moments where you just got some downtime. And so as we're in this whole new way of living, for who knows how long, we have to learn these new rhythms. But I think margin is still important. And so a guy named Richard Swenson wrote this amazing book on margin. And he says margin is this. This is how he defines it. It's the amount beyond what is actually needed. The amount of time beyond what is actually needed. It's the reserve between our current performance and our limits. He goes on to say this. Margin is the space that once existed between ourselves and our limits. When we reach the limits of our resources and abilities, we're out of margin, out of patience, out of an ability to soothe ourselves when we're feeling anxious and upset. So we need to have this practice in our lives daily. And so as I'm speaking today, I'm really excited because I have a little bit of a congregation that's behind the camera. It's my family. So if you see me glancing over, I'm looking for encouraging looks and laughs and smiles and things. And so anyway, oh, by the way, I just have to say this. Just a little bit of margin in the sermon. I'm a Peloton freak. And so if you do Peloton, I want to know your username so we can be there. So for a cool gift, our kids pull together to help us get a Peloton bike. I am so stoked. And I got to tell you, my margin practice means I work out in the morning on my Peloton. So then we'll get into this a little bit too about our habits and things like this with margin. But I think it's important that we realize that this isn't anything new. This cramped spaces and how we wear ourselves out, that this is the kind of culture that God sent Jesus into. People that didn't have margin in their lives, people that were using the law instead of their faith to practice. And so their faith practice is more about duty rather than it was an opportunity. And so margin is that space where instead of saying I have to, you say I get to. So people, even in Jesus' time, who were burdened by life, burdened by politics, burdened by work, burdened by disease, burdened by family. It's a part of the human rhythm. It's just how we're wired up and made up. It's one of the reasons that Jesus stood out. And it's just really interesting that Jesus was always generous with his time. He was generous with his food. He was generous with forgiveness. He was generous with prayer. And we see Jesus constantly practicing margin. On his way to go speak somewhere, people would stop him all the time and say, hey, can you heal me? Or hey, can I have a conversation with you? And Jesus always took the time to stop and listen. And he wasn't just wrapped up in making sure he got to his destination. He was more concerned with being present with people, being present with God. And I think this is the biggest thing with margin. And as the church in America, if we don't look different than our culture, then we're really not understanding what it means to be a follower of Christ in this culture. So when we see Jesus' words and we get his instructions, he really shows us, and this, if you have a Bible with you, open up to Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 through 29. But we really get these awesome instructions for how to have margin in our life. And this is what Jesus says. And gosh, when I was reading this morning as I was wrapping up my sermon prep, and they're such soothing words. And these are words from Jesus to you and to me. And this is what he says, come to me, all who are weary and burdened, That's me. That's you. That's what we're going through. And then he says, I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. I honestly, to start the new year, to be halfway through or whatever in this pandemic, to hear those words are so comforting, so soothing, so important for us to take in, to really realize that this is where we find the peace of Christ is in the margins. So I'm going to use this text all the way through, and this is a super practical message, but I think it's going to be really, really important for us to really make this a practice. So here's a couple of things that when Jesus says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest, this is our action. Our action is to come to Jesus, to come into his presence by prayer, by reading scripture, by taking moments just for quiet meditation, for just breathing deeply. These are the moments where we come to Christ. And so the question is, when we're stressed and anxious, which a lot of us are, and rightly so, what's the first thing you think of? Is it hop on your exercise activity? Is it get something to eat? Is it grab a drink? Or is it, as a follower of Christ, is your first reaction, Jesus, I'm coming to you because I feel burdened? Margin says, our first action, I'm going to go to my God, my Lord and my God who understands me, and he will give me the peace that I need. And so our reward when we take that step is rest is given, poise is possible, and we experience calm and peace. And you're saying, well, how do you know that? I can't prove it. I can't tell you any kind of formula, but I can tell you from experience, those moments when I actually do make those steps toward Christ, there's an ease that somebody's sharing this burden with me, and I can get through it. And I just want to say, I think as people are looking to the church, or not, if those that are looking see people living like this, they're going to be attracted to it. And I say that's a practice that we need. Another action, when we take this text, verse 29 in the text says this, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. So our action here is learn humility and gentleness. Prerequisites for a life of calm and poise. Hey, as human beings, we get somebody offends us, somebody says something in the wrong way to us. What's our first reaction? Defend myself. And Jesus is saying, look, in those moments, take my yoke upon you. Let me share this with you. Let's calm down for a minute. Let's get some perspective. I will give you freedom, ease, to be able to love, to be able to forgive, to be able to explore, to be able to understand the moment that you're in. But the only way we do that is with margin. So he finally says, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. When Jesus talks about taking up his yoke, he is talking about a lifestyle of freedom. And I think sometimes we get confused when we talk about religion and in our faith, Christianity. Sometimes we think, well, there's a lot of do's and don'ts. There's a lot of performance. There's a lot of things I have to do to get the favor of God. And nowhere, when I read the Gospels, when I read the red words of Jesus and see the things that he says, I find nowhere in there where he's telling me to perform a certain way so I can earn his grace and his mercy and his love. What I see is him saying, inviting me to a relationship with him, walking with him, and understanding the rhythms of life in this way to practice presence with him. So this is how we start to live with margin. It opens up opportunities, conversations, experiences, and the ability to see and hear what we miss when we're frantic and stressed. And I'm the first one to say I'm guilty. I don't make this step all the time. And when I do, it shows up. It shows up in my relationships with my family, with my wife, with my children. If I'm taking these steps of taking care of me first, making sure I'm okay and right, and make sure I'm the one that didn't do anything wrong, what does that do? It leaves no margin for any peace, love, forgiveness, joy, reconciliation. And I think we all need to learn this right now because we're all so consumed with what's happening in the world. What's going to happen to me? Well, let's pump the brakes for a minute. What about our neighbor? What about the person in our own house? What about the person down the street that's going through it maybe 10 times worse than what we are? These are the moments where followers of Jesus look a little bit different, not in a better way, but look a little bit different to the world, instead of being people that are trying to push the politics so my rights aren't taken away from me. Again, I don't read that anywhere. I see Jesus inviting me into a relationship with him, inviting others into a relationship with him, and it all comes out of a place of margin. So I say all that because we got to set up a reality here of what's going on with us as human beings. And the first one is this: we all have limits. A person's got to know their limitations. Clint Eastwood said that. Seriously, he said that. Thanks. I got a little chuckle from the crowd of people here. We can only be in one place. Okay? And this limitation means God has a plan for how we approach our limited resources. Living within margin means we'll learn to be poised and anxiety-free because we're obeying God by not living beyond our limits. And I think, if you're a type A personality, if you're a perfectionist, sometimes we just think that we got to keep driving, keep pushing. I could do better, I can do more. And what do we find ourselves doing? We're at this frenetic pace that doesn't allow us to be able to just stop for a minute and be at peace and understand the path that God has us on. So we all have limitations. We can't do everything. We can't be everywhere. And we've all experienced this now. And how busy, how frustrating is it, especially for those of you with little ones at home and you're trying to help them with school and you're trying to do your job. Wow, that's a lot. And you're realizing quickly what your limitations are. This is a moment where we find the discipline to have margin in our life to be able to take a breath and realize, okay, I can't do it all, but this is what I can do. 2, we're relational beings. I think this is a really important one. We all need thriving and healthy relationships. We're hardwired for this. Being isolated, being separated, being alone has created mental and emotional stress due to this pandemic. I really believe that we're going to have to be ready for the fallout of the mental and emotional issues that are going to happen with all of us, and dealing with how we've been so isolated and alone and haven't had really these moments to talk about things like this, margin. So we miss community, getting together as a church. We miss those things. A quick chat over coffee. Our margins are slim as we focus on the necessary requirements to prevent spreading the virus. So it really cuts us off, doesn't it? But we have this need to be relational. And Zoom only goes so far, am I right? FaceTime only goes so far, am I right? So it's these moments when all of a sudden somebody tests negative and you test negative and you're like, oh my gosh, can we actually be in the same room together? Yes, with a mask, but let's do it. Let's do it. Let's be together. And we need that. We hunger, we crave that. And sometimes we don't know how bad we need it until we're without it. And I think a lot of us have really experienced that. So how does margin help us really put us in a place where we really see the need to be relational? And so, again, as we've gone through this whole kind of Groundhog's Day kind of deal, that each day feels like the same, we get up, get on Zoom, do our job, go to the bathroom down the hall, go downstairs for a cup of coffee, or if you're in an apartment, everything's all in the same place, which might be kind of cool, actually, because you don't have to move very far. But it's hard. It's difficult when we're all by ourselves. So it makes us then, as we're coming to the disciplines of what it means to be a follower of Christ, good grief, how do we practice Sabbath day? What does it mean to take a day off? What does it mean to take time off to do something for myself? What does that even look like? How do we practice that in a pandemic? The need to make time, though, for God is critical to our soul. I think our souls are just starving right now. Why? Maybe because we just don't feel like we have the time or the place or the presence to be able to meet with God, and we need that. Like it or not, arguably, maybe you believe this or not, we need a relationship with something more powerful and higher than us. And I'm going to say that's God. So we need that. Margin demands we put this practice in our spiritual life. So I'm making an assumption here. I'm making an assumption that there's lots of value to your spiritual life. And so if you're a follower of Christ, that's a connection with God through prayer, study, taking these moments of meditation, taking these moments of Sabbath, where we just really reflect on who God is. This is critical to our survival and our well-being. The other thing, because we're relational beings, is our significance. Try seeing ourselves as investors rather than consumers. And that's hard to do right now because we all need something. A break, time off, getting out of my house. And so to really put a mindset of like, I need something, instead of thinking, well, what if I give something? What if I let somebody else have a break? What if I practiced hospitality in a way that is appropriate for a pandemic, but allowed somebody to have freedom for their soul and their spirit? I think that's a whole mindset that we have to take on, and margin creates this. So think of how, again, we can create enough margin in our life that allows us to bless people, love people, here's one, forgive people, and reach out to people who are suffering. Margin gives us this opportunity to do that. So our focus then is creating margin that's intentional. And so again, super practical, and you've heard these things before, but sometimes it's good to hear them again. Here are a few things to get you started as you're creating margin. If you do take some time for your soul, you do take some time for your spirit, you do take some time for your mental health, set your phone and devices to do not disturb. I think forever. I promise you it's a pretty powerful feeling. Put the phone away. Don't even have it near you. Turn your computer off and just take a minute. Maybe write some stuff down. Journal. Analog sometimes is really good for you rather than typing everything. So take a minute to just put the electronic stuff away. Protect the time you set aside for God. Make this your lifeline. Margin says this is when I spend time with God, and I'm going to protect that at all costs. And I'm going to get up a little earlier. I'm going to go to bed a little bit later. I'm going to take my lunch break and just have this moment that I've set aside for God. Another critical thing. So, three things happen when our margin decreases, and I'm going to end with this. Just three really quick things. Number one, when margin decreases, my stress level goes up. I think we've pretty much said that all the way through. As your margins decrease, your stress increases. Margin, in spite of all that we're dealing with, gives us the space to navigate our emotions, our tasks, and gives us opportunity to plan for reserves that we need to live each day at a healthy pace. You and I were designed to live with margin because that is where relationships thrive and generosity lives. Two, when margin decreases, the focus is on me. We become very self-centered because we feel threatened. We are forced to find our answers to help relieve the pressure we're under. We focus our emotional energy on ourselves, and the temptation for excess to relieve the pressures are very real. We're not thinking about being present in our marriage or family or job or future. We're just thinking about ourselves and the increasing pressure and just trying to get through. Surviving rather than thriving. Existing rather than flourishing. And again, this isn't things I'm talking about like, hey, get blessed, get rich. These are things about how we bless and help other people thrive and focus. Number three, when margins decrease, my relationships suffer. Kindness, patience, and love happen in the margins. It's in the margins where relationships are nurtured and where they grow. Having margin allows us to be present with those we love and poised with those who challenge us. As margins decrease, so do the health of our relationships. Pressure from the lack of margin hurts the relationships, and tension is the result. Marriages, relationships, families suffer for lack of margin. And so these things, when the margin decreases, these things really affect our entire existence as we live our life. So those three things I think are true, and I think they happen. And I think, when you're sensing that, margin then is going to allow you to find the space to be able to have an accountability partner, or go to God, or ask for forgiveness, or make the time to increase your margins so you have something to sustain you to get through life. So finally, Jesus' three commands for gaining margin. We'll go back through and look at the text of Matthew 11. Come to me. This means you have to leave where you're at and move towards him. I don't think any relationship with Christ that's static is enjoyable. I think any relationship with Christ that is dynamic, that moves you toward Him, those are the things that gives you everything you need to be able to look at the world in a whole different view. It's a kaleidoscope. The colors are beautiful and they change, and you see people differently. Take my yoke. Be free. Oh, any gift for the new year is this. Be free. We're continually becoming who we are. Having margin creates the blessing to know that and experience it. Let me teach you, says Jesus. The point here is that we are in trouble because of what we don't know. I know I need margin, but I don't have time for margin. Careful with that. Careful with that. Hey, if you want to talk about this, email me. Send me a text. I would love to chat with you about this and maybe help set up some practices and things that could really help you put margin into your life. And finally, we're going to have limits because we're human. Limits you choose, or the limits culture pushes you to. I want the limits that God invites me to. Choosing to live a life with margin means I obey God, who wants me to be free. Because in my obedience to Him, there's a freedom that comes with it. I'm not pressured to be somebody I'm not. I'm comfortable with who I am, and I know who I am. Why? Because I have enough margin in my life to really sit with that and know that and be okay with that. So having margin means living with less anxiety and more resources because you reap what you sow. And so All Saints, I pray that you have an amazing new year. I pray that you find margin in your life, and that's what we're here for. We're here to walk with you, to pray with you, to give you these opportunities to put margin in your life, to be able to see where you're at and what God is leading you to do. So I hope this is helpful, and I pray that it is. I want to pray for you now before we go and say thank you. So Jesus, thank you so much for those listening, and I just ask God that they would see the need in their life to obey you and see the freedom in that, to create enough margin, Lord God, to change the way they see themselves, the way they see the world, the way they see their life, their relationships, their money, their time, their work. That God, as margins increase, so does the effectiveness and the health of the soul and the spirit. So Lord, I just pray that God, we as a church community would demonstrate this to our community, that they can enjoy the benefits of living with a God that works within the margin we create. In Jesus' name, amen. Hey, All Saints, we love you. We miss you. We're so excited to be able to get back together. Maybe 2021's the year. So hey, go to our webpage. You can interact with us there. There's places for you to find groups. You can email any of us and say, hey, I want to know more about margin and how I can apply this in my life. There's a giving portal. But more importantly, it's just for us to be in community and get together. So have a wonderful rest of your day, and Happy New Year.